And we are live with another episode of the Brown Water Banter podcast. My name is Jared Seymour.
My name is Joey Cates.
It is Joey Cates. And we got a good show for you lined up, man, in the studio. A lot going on in the country right now, controversial stuff. We figured we'd tackle a topic that doesn't have a lot of controversy associated with it. We kicked around a lot of ideas, and we came up with the snapper quota.
That's right.
He's already got his head down against the table.
We got the whipping boy in here.
Trevor's back from the Department of Marine Resources. Man, we're going to be talking about the snapper quota and whether or not we're going to open snapper season again later at the end of this year. Spoiler alert, we're not. And we got Captain JJ over here off of a big win. JJ, what was that fish and what was the tournament?
It was a Blue Marlin 649. That was the Jimmy Johnson Atlantic City big blowout.
Awesome. So JJ just winning, living his best life and winning tournaments. Before we jump into the conversation tonight, though, we're going to do like we always do and thank the people that keep the lights on for us over here at the Brown Water Studio. Right out of the gate, Dr. Robbie Williams over at Southern Magnolia Smiles, man. You can look them up on Facebook and Instagram at Southern Magnolia Smiles. They are located right there on Washington Avenue, like I say, in Ocean Springs. 2024 is the year to smile more. So when you're ready to book that consultation, give them a shout at 228-215-1202 and tell them that Brown Water sent you. If you find yourself in need of legal representation for any reason, Taylor & Cox Law Firm has been practicing law on the Mississippi Gulf Coast for over 30 years. They come highly recommended in their field. That's our buddy Tyler right there, man. They do felonies, misdemeanors, DUIs, family law, divorce, child custody, you name it. If you need somebody to fight for you tooth and nail, give Taylor Cox Law Firm a shout at 228-696-0111. See the Swamp, man. Check them out. Facebook, See the number 2 and Swamp. They got 2 locations on the Gulf Coast, one in Goshen, one in Gulfport. They've got all your tackle and apparel needs covered. They got brown water gear. They got kayaks, rods, reels, everything that you need to go for down on the water, man. And I think they've even got like all kind of outdoor products, as a matter of fact, not just for fishing. So
hunting stuff too.
Correct. Give them a shout at 228-205-3964. If you're ready to get rid of that dad bod, Forever Young Men and Women's Health has you covered. They can do blood work on you, figure out if you're hormone deficient, vitamin deficient, get you back on track, man, to get rid of that, like I say, that dad bod, get you back in the gym. You may need testosterone replacement. Forever Young Men and Women specializes in that for men and women, believe it or not. So you can give them a call at 228-363-6623 and get get control of your health again, man. I think you're going to dig it. Yeah, get yoked. Last episode, we had Alan Belcher in the studio with Joe Pace from the Seawolves. They've got their own promotions company that they have formed together, and they've got their first event coming up right here in Biloxi, August 17th at the Biloxi Community Center, which is the Gruitt Center, if you're familiar with that, right there on Howard Avenue. Alan was going to be fighting a pro fight on a amateur card. So he's the pro fight. Alan's going to be fighting Teddy Webster. And then they have a tough man competition after that, which is going to be your amateur guys going in there to slug it out. So it's going to be a good time. You can buy, there's a link on their Facebook page. Just go to BKO Fights. And you can buy tickets there. So
yeah, we're going to have some tickets to give out.
That's right.
So stay tuned to the show.
That's right. We're excited about that. We'll probably do it through some of our other channels like the app and the website. So if you're not subscribed to those, I would highly suggest going and doing that. We also got some other cool products to be given away in the future. We haven't even mentioned that yet. The EPIRBs, man.
Yeah, we got some EPIRBs that we're going to get in. I mean, we already got it in, but we're going to do a giveaway with those too. It was an awesome episode. If you want to check that out. What episode was that?
It was like 3 or 4 ago, but let me see here. I'm going to pull it up. I believe that was what ARC,
ACR.
Excuse me, I'm dyslexic. ACR Artec is the company that we had on. That's the company that had the PLBs, personal locator beacons, and the EPIRBs that saved those guys' life that sank in the Gulf of Mexico. They sent us a package. We didn't ask. They just did it of a bunch of stuff. So we figured what better way than to give it back to you guys. So stay tuned. Like I say, it'll be through the app. And
get the app, sponsored by Modern Recoil. Yeah. So check it out, get it, because there's a lot of more giveaways coming up.
Yeah, it's going to be beneficial for you here in the future. All right, so now that we got that out of the way, gentlemen, first of all, thank y'all for being here in the studio. JJ, for stopping in, man. We appreciate it.
Yeah, man.
Where in the heck do we start? So, recently had snapper season. The allocated quota of catch for this year's snapper season was 64,000 pounds, okay? We hit 60,000 pounds at the end of the scheduled season. Am I saying that correctly?
Yep.
Had some bad weather in there, at least for the first 2 weeks. I know. Hit 60,000 pounds, and everyone's always kind of wondering, hoping, are we going to get that second in season towards the
Correct.
end of the year? Looking like no. Is that correct? Because of the fact that we're so close to 64.
Yeah, given that it's 4,000 pounds left, it makes it very difficult to open up to the full fishery. Now, that doesn't mean that we aren't going to try to do things to provide access to finish it out, because we don't want to leave fish on the table. We want to try to maximize as much access as possible. And I think there's, a little bit of a topic to cover here when it comes to where that number originates from.
Yes.
How that quota is formed, and really what we've been dealing with this fishery for what I can say is probably the last 8 years.
Yeah.
And if you'd like me to get into that.
Yes,
I do.
yeah,
I
let's
do.
dive into it.
We we were talking about it before we went live. This is your third time on the show. We've went in the weeds on how we get these quotas again through the federal government, right? And how it gets transferred to you. We're going to go all over that again. But if you haven't seen the episodes before, just go back into our previous episodes. Look for the Department of Marine Resource episodes with Trevor on there. If you want to get like all the way down and dirty on just that. But let's start back there again from the top, and kind of go over that as well.
Yeah. And first off, I'll preface it by saying I'm a human being. 2 young daughters.
This is a gentleman here.
Trevor's just a good guy.
He's just a working man,
Just a
right?
working man, yeah.
It's not him who's picking these numbers.
Correct.
Yeah, trying to afford a mortgage and paying for daycare. So, but I'll back it up, I guess, all the way back pre-90s.
Okay.
And the establishment of how essentially federal species are managed today, which is through ACLs and basically quota monitoring to a degree. So the number one species to describe here is Atlantic cod and what it faced. It was a fishery that grew and grew, staple of the Northeast, staple of the fishing industry in the United States. And in the 1990s and 91, it dropped and crashed to 98%. So it crashed 98%.
Well,
There's only 2% of that stock
Left.
from the virgin biomass. So that was a shock across everyone and led to some pretty foundational legislative changes with Magnuson Stevens, and basically laid out what is now currently the foundation of fisheries management in the United States. And a lot of those things weren't that bad. They're logical. They're common sense. We should be looking at removals, investigating data streams, evaluating the stock in a scientific manner to be able to move forward and manage these fisheries sustainably in the future. At some point along the way, we kind of, I think, as a whole, began to rely on assessments and some of this data a little bit too much without really looking into the roots of how logical it is, how representative it is, and whether it's a good fit for the fisheries that we're managing. So let's move into red snapper a little bit. So snapper, obviously the height of the commercial fishery, it developed in the 1800s, went on today. It's all listed out in this document I got with me, but I was having some fun reading for
that's
the last
that's
3 or
pretty
4
cool.
weeks.
Yeah.
But 90s, the catches went down. It was most apparent on the West Florida shelf. You saw basically an absence of snapper to a degree in that area, and catches and sizes decreased across the board, which led to essentially where we are today. 90s through the 2000s, increased regulatory measures, changes in bag limit, size limit, seasons, introduction of IFQs in the fishery, all that kind of stuff essentially happened during that time period. Also, what happened is basically the fishery got put on a rebuilding plan that essentially had it rebuilding through 2032, which put constrained quotas across the board for the fishery ACLs.
right.
Can I also jump in here to say that late 90s, early 2000s, we're talking, maybe even before, you help me out, differences in technology. We've talked about it on the show before.
Yeah.
GPS, spot locks, outboard motors, all that affected how much people were catching, correct?
Yeah, there's a difference in the actual way the fishery was prosecuted, right?
There
It
you
was
go.
largely
Good way to say it.
commercial with recreational there. And since then, you've been seeing kind of a shift in how that has been executed, with an increase in boat availability, increase in technology, increase in access, that kind of stuff. So I'll say this. You started to see a problem with ACL-based management really on the recreational side as it began to gain prevalence. And that kind of spiked in 2010 all the way through 2017. So I think everybody that listens to this, and especially the folks at the table, remember when that season started cascading down and everyone started raising their arms.
Yeah.
It was 2 months, then it was a month, then it was 14 days, then it was 11 days.
Well, that's why I got out.
And then it was 3 days.
It went from 4 to 2
Yeah.
to 2 to 2 to 2 to 2. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the mark of that is the 3-day season in 2017.
Yes.
That's essentially when everything hit the fan and the Secretary of Commerce basically came in and said, nope, not happening. 39-day extension, weekends only.
Gotcha.
So basically that was as low as it was going to go. I think the emergency lights got put on across the board.
Right.
There was a shift. And a lot of that came from that basically cascade in the number of days was the reliance on ACLs as management measures and a way to evaluate.
Explain what,
Yeah.
Annual catch limits.
Okay.
Yeah, because people aren't going to know those acronyms.
Yeah,
Right. So you have the overall quota, and then it's broken down into sectors, and then it's broken down within the private recreational sector. Now, the entire basis of our management structure that began with magazines that I mentioned earlier is that we have this number that we can harvest to. And if we harvest that number consistently, the stock will remain stable and everything will be fine throughout time. Well, the issue, which is one of the ones I pointed out in the first podcast, is that you have to know what your landings are and be able to essentially develop them with some level of confidence. Otherwise, you're going to start running into problems.
Mm-hmm.
And typically with our state and really with other states as well, is you begin to see those problems when you start putting additional restrictions on the fisheries, season links, right? Season changes, shortening the season to a constrained time period, decreasing catch, creating derbies, basically everything that happened with red snapper in that time period.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially what you had is that from that time period, they were decreasing the amount of access by cutting off season days, but still getting the same amount of fish that were being caught. That's what it was producing, right? It seemed as if the management measures that were being put in place didn't constrain the fishery in the ways that they should have. Essentially, it wasn't dropping it proportionally with a 50% reduction. So you just kept going and kept going and basically had this negative feedback loop that spiraled all the way down to 3 days.
Which was bad data.
That's where he's headed.
So that's kind of where all this came to be. So 2017, we had Tails and Scales online. We had a 39-day extension. Essentially, this was, we've got to do something here and we've got to change it because there's issues with access. And so let's find a path forward. And that path forward was state management, which began through EFPs in 2018 and 2019.
EFPs.
Exempted fishing permits. So each state basically provided what they thought was a reasonable percentage, which allowed for an allocation and said, we're going to manage it through the state system that's developed for each specific state. For us, it was Tails and Scales, and we requested 137,149 pounds, which is exactly what we landed in 2017, because we said that increase in access, I think, is representative of what our anglers should be getting on a consistent basis.
Okay.
Who's in charge of requesting that? Who puts that up?
I think that would be at the agency level. I don't think the governor requested it directly, but I would likely have to be signed off on by the governor.
Right.
But essentially, it was every state.
Yeah.
Let's hold right here for just 1 second. I want everybody to know, keep your comments coming. Captain Brian, we'll get to it in just 1 second, but let us get through the explanation first. We'll jump into that. I don't want anybody to think we're ignoring him. So that 147, did you say? 137 number. Joe, you were asking where that number came from. Was I hearing you right? Is that what you were asking?
No, I was asking who puts that request in to get that number? What agency?
Because that's what I'm asking. Where does 137 come from? That comes from the feds.
No, that was what was landed within the state in 2017, and it was equal to 3.55% of the overall quota that we had.
Okay, so let's break it down. The quotas come from the feds, right? They're the ones who start this.
Right. You have an assessment that comes out,
right?
And we'll get to the different currencies and all that here in a minute because we talked about that one.
Yeah.
But you have an assessment that comes out that provides what an overall OFL or an overfishing limit would be.
Okay.
That's decided. Then you go down and you have an ABC, which is the acceptable biological catch. And then that further goes down into ACLs that are split across sectors and everything else.
Catch limit.
Yeah.
So, sorry, lost my train of thought.
We got
17,
exempted fishing permits 2018, 2019. We coincidentally got a bump because of that rebuilding plan that I mentioned earlier for 2032. Slight increase in the overall quota for the fishery. We went from 137 to 150, and that's what we operated on. under for a couple of years.
Now, when they say rebuilding, what are we rebuilding? Because
The
I would
stock.
think, right, which I would think would have you catch less if you're trying to rebuild the stock. No?
Yes,
Okay. And that's
But-
what happened? Or
it's stepwise increases over time, essentially, right? So in order to meet the rebuilding plan, no restricted catches to X amount over time, that incrementally bumped up over time to meet the rebuilding plan.
the restriction bumps up?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you get more,
Yeah.
right? So small bump, which
Yeah.
for us ended up giving us 14,000 additional pounds,
Okay.
but it was just part of the process, right? So we were
Okay.
able to get from 137 to 150. And about the time 2019 came around, there was the discussion of calibration because, like I mentioned earlier, the quotas are developed in a specific currency related to recreational catch. And that catch is the MRIP program, Marine Recreational Information Program. It's the federal survey that we aid in, right? We conduct dockside, MOSAP.
Yep.
And then they do the mail out survey for the effort. Those two things combined are what generates recreational catch estimates for every single state outside of the West Coast in the United States, even Hawaii.
Okay.
So the last assessment that was done to provide management advice was done in something that was called MRIP CHTS, which is MRIP Coastal Household Telephone Survey. That is the effort survey where they're calling landlines across and everything else
Correct.
like that.
Yeah. We talked about that.
Right. So we talked about that one.
Mhm.
State surveys came online and they were producing different numbers. So we were technically harvesting. Basically, when we asked for the 3.55% and 137, 149, it was taken as, well, you're making this request in CHTS pounds, when in reality, we were saying, no, this is what we've got for our state and what we want to harvest is this amount. So they wanted to essentially fix the disparity between the surveys, specifically the ones for Alabama and Mississippi, but across the Gulf. But the ones with the most disparity were us and Alabama. And basically that led down a long route of arguments and discussions and different opinions and everything else to the point where it was on the council floor and discussed. And essentially we went through the data and analyzed it and did what we could to basically highlight and illustrate the differences that exist between the programs. And that one is exceptionally volatile for our state, right? It's producing estimates that are of a higher magnitude, but they're inconsistent over time, right? Because I wouldn't be sitting here today, I don't think, in the same shoes if the magnitude was different, but it was consistent with the fishery. The issue is that the magnitude was off and it was inconsistent.
Right.
So you can't calibrate, right? You can't compare two different surveys. You can't mend them together
Mhm.
if one is wildly inconsistent while one is relative to the fishery.
Right.
So that culminated to numerous presentations to the National Academy of Sciences, presentations to another committee, and then ultimately myself providing a presentation that we all worked on to the Gulf SSC to essentially say, this is where we're at. This is what we've observed. These are the problems that we have. This calibration factor needs to be changed. We need to alleviate, what's going on with this program as a whole. And there was a lot of conversation about it. It wasn't an easy topic. It was a fairly controversial topic. What ended out of that is that the original calibration factor that they passed, which was essentially a 60% reduction, which gave us 62, changed to a different reduction. So we'd be at 82. So it gave us 20,000 more pounds. Now, is that the number where we want to be at? No, it's not.
Mhm.
Can I say I'm happy with the number that we have right now? I'd say no. I think we got a pretty bad end of the deal, even though we did a ton of work on the front end and try to be as diligent as we could to provide what we thought we needed for the state. I think we just got caught up within the process on the federal side and we got lost in somewhere between common sense and statistics.
Yeah. So to clear it up, Department of Marine Resources has nothing to do with that number. You just enforce it.
Outside of
comes
the
from NOAA.
original request
Yes.
in 2017, where we said we want 137, 149 because that's what our fishery can manage.
Mhm.
That's the only time it happened. Once
And-
the calibration stuff went through,
NOAA hands you a piece of paper with a number on it and says, this is what you get. Doesn't matter what you say about
right,
it.
that's what we have to work with this year. And this year was 64, and next year we'll realize the gains of the new calibration factor, and it'll be 82. And like I said, that number still probably, in my mind, isn't the best for our fishery. I think the best number for our fishery is around the 120 to 125 mark. I think that's where we'll operate consistently where we see consistent metrics. Because when we were at the 150 mark, I mean, we were still producing it, still meeting the number, but there were times where that catch would drop a little bit, or we'd see a little bit of inconsistency. So I think somewhere between that 120 and 150, I think we'd be in a great spot.
What
Yeah.
what are you using scientifically to say 120 or 130, 40, 50 is a good number? How are y'all determining
Gauging
that?
that, yeah.
Gauging that.
On mine's the observations of the fishery over the last, 6 to 8 years as we've operated.
Mhm.
And a lot of that is through the data from tails and scales and the other metrics we see dockside.
But what I'm asking is let's just call it 120. Okay.
Yeah.
If that's the number, from y'all's perspective, if we hit 120, does that mean, well, that's a good number because there was enough fish out there to hit that number? Is that how you look at that, or is that not
No,
correct?
I look at it as something we can achieve over time without deleterious effects to the stock while maximizing access to the fishermen.
Okay. That
right?
makes more sense to
Because
me.
we talked about it in the first one, right? There's certainly amount of days that the red snapper fishery can handle is why I like to think of it. And we know that number's not 3, but we know the number's not 365 either.
Correct.
It's somewhere in between.
Mm-hmm.
So in my mind, 120, which is probably around 75 to 80 days, covers the major holidays, Labor Day included. That number, I think, gets us to the point where we're achieving a level of optimal yield for the fishery while also continuing to maximize angler success within the fishery. Because you can set the number at unlimited, but at some point you'll realize that you can't do it the entirety of the time because you'll start to get catch drops. You'll start to see decreases in weight. You'll see these metrics that show you that.
I'm glad you said that, because that was my next question is, how do you know when too much is too much? Those things,
Yeah.
the catch drop will, even though we're running wide open, the season's open, you're going to see diminishing
The
returns.
numbers come in.
You're going to see
skewed,
smaller
yeah.
fish. Is that what y'all are looking for?
Yeah. So you see,
Because that's a valid question.
Yeah.
People go, how do you know? Right.
Yeah,
That's
so
what
one-
people get aggravated about the most.
one thing's smaller fish, one thing's decreases in angler success. The other one, which we're hoping to rely on in the future, is some fishery independent index of abundance, right? That's typically what you try to rely on when it comes to relative abundance of a stock over time. In order for it to be used and be meaningful, it has to track with the actual stock that's in the water. So the methods of the past that have been conducted on the federal side, bottom long lines, vertical long lines, things like that, it's tough to see how related they are to stock abundance when it comes to areas, especially over our local fish havens and everything else. So we recently got some funding to be able to try to essentially produce a visual survey, a camera-based survey, to be able to monitor. Now, I know everyone knows just as well as I do, half the time the water out there is just
You ain't
complete
saying
trash.
nothing, yeah.
But there is typically a layer within that water column that does have a fair amount of visibility to it.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can establish some running line index of abundance for those reef fish, especially on artificial reefs, you'll not only be able to see the impacts of the fishery over the season, you'll also be able to see essentially over time, multi-year, how the stock's looking.
Okay. Yeah. Paul Miller dropped a comment. He said, we should stop trying to count how many fish are in the ocean. You're never going to get it right. Why not just try and focus on what produces more fish?
Which
Probably
in turn
would-
it turns into reef building.
Yeah.
We got such a limited number because they got to
Right.
have habitat
Right.
to
Right.
grow, and that's one of the things that people miss out on, and they also fail to realize that some of this stock assessments things I'm not a huge fan of, and the reason why, because I grew up in the commercial sector and the charter sector.
We'll get into that in a second.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
keep
yeah.
going though.
Yeah,
Keep going.
but because of how it's split, and it's
Right.
all
Yeah.
comes down to accountability. So a lot of guys get mad and I understand it because I've had charter boats, recreational and commercial side. But it all comes into accountability. Every pound of red snapper that the commercial sector catches is accounted for.
Right.
Every single pound.
So we have touched on that before here on the show, and I'll go back to Captain Brian's question earlier. He asked us a few minutes ago, why limit recreational sector and not commercial first? I think that's where you're going with this though, JJ, right? They are more accurate on the commercial side, but it also puts a higher cost on the commercial guys that we don't want to pass to the rec guys when it comes to tracking devices and how they monitor that, correct?
Because and that's it. So the recreational side, you're not going to go put a VMS on your vessel
Right.
and run out there and go catch your snappers and come.
Vehicle.
Nobody wants that, which is a vessel management system.
Thank you.
IFQ, which is your individual fishing quota, and then you have the tactile allowable catch of the snapper quota. So let's just use an example. I'm just throwing numbers out there just for reference. Let's say they
open the tack at 6 million pounds. Commercial sector gets 51% of that. Here's the problem. And this is what people fail to realize is that the commercial sector has VMSs.
Mhm.
They have an IFQ of that 51%. So let's say all of us have a fish house or a couple boats, commercial boats, you're going to get 6%. You get 6%. You get 6%. I guess they can't have more than 6% under their boat's name, their business name. Now, they might be able to spread that a little bit and buy some quotas back and forth throughout other people. And if I'm wrong, you can stop me.
Yeah.
But my big
Go
thing is that the commercial sector has created an accountability factor. They
Right.
can't come unload without somebody there. They weigh every fish that comes out of the box. So until the recreational sector is
Well,
willing
that
to do
makes a
that,
ton of sense for a commercial fishing vessel.
correct.
But when you try to transfer that over to the rec situation,
It's impossible.
Well, I think the big question is why does commercial get to fish and raid the state waters before the recreational gets to touch them?
They're not allowed to fish. They have to be outside 9 miles.
Yeah. So
Commercial
there's-
sector boat can't fish 9 miles. He has to be outside 9 miles. And his VMS tracks him and pings him on that.
and the federal fishery, so it started out at 51.49 is where it's been, and that was challenged. I think was it more than a decade ago.
Mhm.
They tried to change it. And essentially, it went all the way up to the higher levels of court and everywhere else, and basically it was
Shot down.
brought back to 51.49 for the reasons that he explained just now. Is when they looked at the recreational landings estimates and they looked at the accountability, the commercial fishery with all the reporting mechanisms and VMS and everything else, they basically sided on the commercial side. Now, it all loops back to the same thing I've been saying for the last little while is you have to have better recreational
Data.
fishery
Yeah, yeah,
statistics.
And that's, yeah.
And
so that's
the
what
key
Paul
of it.
just asked again. And Paul, thank you for your comments. Paul Miller, Tuna Talks.
Yeah.
Y'all go check that podcast out. He's got Venice covered. He said, so you're saying that stock assessments are accurate?
So
And again, we led with Trevor's just a guy.
Yes.
He's just,
Yeah,
he's
yeah,
not
yeah,
making all this stuff.
yeah.
You know, he's not making these rules, and he's
Right.
just a
So-
guy answering for us. And
Yeah.
we
So I sit on the
Appreciate that.
standing SSC of the Gulf Council, and we have to review a lot of the assessments and everything else. And here's what I'll say about it, right? The assessments are only as accurate as the data that is going into them.
Mhm.
And there's often a lot of times where we fail to truly evaluate the uncertainty associated with the assessments, because a lot of times
that's all a science.
those
though.
inputs are controlled, right? And to a degree, you have to know what the amount of removals are for an assessment to be successful. You have to know them with confidence. And it kind of circles back to the same message, right? The recreational fishery statistics that we have right now for the federal fisheries, they're not overly quality. I mean, we've got some magnitude problems and we got some
Right.
inconsistency problems, all of which are being evaluated now
Now that's
at the
the federal
level.
side you're talking
Correct.
about.
Right.
And it led to the development of the ROLP
The
and MS
landing
Grill
permit,
that we're
yeah.
getting
The
ready to
landing
get to.
permit, yeah.
So all of that is essentially a way to have regional consistency in the fisheries metrics, because while I don't doubt, right, the assessment process in itself is probably the most accurate and technical way to gather large amounts of data and multiple data streams to pull together to give you an evaluation of the stock. There's sometimes where it doesn't pass the common sense test,
Mhm.
right? So let's look at amberjack. We talked about this before. We've made numerous changes on amberjack over the last decade and a half. I mean,
Yeah.
bag changes, size limit
One
changes,
per.
change on change on change.
30-day season.
And
Yeah.
every change, every season length, every bag limit has not led to a response from the stock in any manner, right? There hasn't been any realized gains. There hasn't been any shift in abundance. There hasn't been any growth in the fishery or anything else like that. So it's almost like we're back in the same red snapper 20 twin phase where
Negative.
you're
I can
just
tell you why,
negative
because they
feedback
cut
loop.
down 265. That was the
That was
amberjack
it.
capital of the world.
But okay, so that's good. That's funny, and that's a good point. And JJ, you mentioned it earlier. I mean,
Structure.
are we? Yeah, exactly. How much does that? We all feel like pretty much know that plays in, right? They have to have something
Yeah.
to be around.
Oh, yeah,
Habitat.
and the big thing is here for the state of Mississippi, which sucks, is there's not a lot of hard bottom. You go to Alabama, you go to Florida, which we all know my background, but there's a lot of hard bottom over the natural bottom that naturally holds the bait and the fish.
Mhm.
So now here we got to create an artificial structure, and if you follow that bottom and know the contours out there, we got big giant mud flats.
Well, is it okay? I didn't want to cut you off. Is my question then though is that are the guys that are doing all the making the quotas, trying to narrow in how long the season should be and where it should be at? Are we also looking at habitat as there's more than one way,
a variable.
There's more than one lever to pull here to try to fix this situation. And if we're not talking about artificial reefs, then maybe we are kind of chasing our tail. Is that even in the discussion?
No, the lever was pulled during the Great Red Snapper count that Congress funded to be able to basically get an evaluation of absolute abundance of the red snapper stock in the Gulf of Mexico.
Okay.
And that was a full-scale evaluation of not only artificial structure, but also
so that was in that
uncharacterized bottom, everything else like that. And
okay.
essentially the findings were that the abundance estimates that are produced from it were like 3 times higher than what was produced in the previous assessment, and that there's a fair amount of fish that sit out there essentially on what they call uncharacterized bottom, but in reality it's sparse structure that's across an entire vast area that isn't necessarily categorized, right? It could be a single tire dumped off of.
Right.
Well, there's a lot of pieces of limestone too that has
pipelines.
You got limestone that you don't even know there's a cut in the bottom, and you're running along and you see this big show on your bottom machine. You round back up, and let's say you have the day trip of your life, but you go back to that same set of numbers 2 years later, and you don't see a mark, and you're like, well, there's nothing here, and you leave. Well, what people don't realize is they go into that limestone bottom and go down, and that's like a cave underwater. And they're not going to show up on your machine. They just happen when you went over it that day.
Okay.
So there's a lot of that's not accounted for also.
Okay.
And so that's what that study kind of did.
I guess kind of almost to ask the same question in a different way is that when you look at any population, snapper, amberjack, whatever, and you say, hey, let's reduce the season, does anyone ever say, or the amount you can catch or the length or anything, does anyone else ever say, maybe that too, but in addition, can we create more reefs? Is that ever in the discussion?
We cut down,
and I know there's a lot of red tape.
Yeah.
There's a lot of red tape. That's a whole nother podcast too. But is that in the discussion when you talk about stock management?
I'd say where it sits typically on the management discussion, that side of things is usually left as always a running priority for the state and sometimes for the federal side, right? But our artificial reef program is always trying to vie for more area, more structure, more rigs to reef, all that. That's a running funding source, rigs to reef. And I mean,
you pulled the book out.
I pulled the book out.
Great.
So
I like this.
This is 1965, a report on the red snapper fishery. For those that are wondering, it's
that camera right there.
Right there.
There you go. Look at that.
Old document from the Department of the Interior, but essentially shows the old snapper grounds where the fishery began in the 1800s and 1900s.
I don't want to tear it.
There you go. But essentially, it shows the old banks, the offshore banks.
Yeah, it's got Swanson's Ridge and
so the hard bottom,
edge.
Everything else like that.
And we ain't got none of it. Not a single spot.
We got a little bit, not as much as everybody else, but that just kind of illustrates the importance and the need for the artificial structure that not only Alabama but also ourselves has put down, and the importance of the rigs and everything else. So I'd say that's always a priority for us, is to increase the amount of habitat and maximize the amount of habitat we can have to be able to help bolster the fish populations, because during this time, you could fish that whole stretch from Horn Island all the way out to the edge of that shelf and probably not catch a single thing.
No.
Snapper,
I've done it.
There's plenty of things
I've done it.
out there. But
Back then?
Sharks.
Okay. Is that got to do?
not because now we have all our artificial reefs that we've built and created.
Okay.
We've created structure to stop those fish.
Yeah.
So those
before
fish
that
come
was
through
just
there.
mud.
It was just all mud bottom.
Okay.
And so the problem we run into, because nobody wants to put shrimpers out, right?
Right.
So-
no, we've
and
talked
we-
about that on here.
Right. And we got
few
such a
times.
limited amount of space to create artificial reefs. So you go out there and start taking away from those guys. So it's a fine line. It's definitely a fine line. We want everybody to succeed and have a really good seafood market that comes out of our neck of the woods here.
Yeah. Well, I guess my question, and I might be out of left field on this, the quota doesn't have to be in state waters in Mississippi.
so for us, the quota is out to 200 nautical miles through state management. That's for every single Gulf state, because when Amendment 50 was passed and the EFPs were passed, they essentially gave us management out to the EEZ.
Okay.
And so when we open our season, it's no longer state versus federal waters. Essentially, it's open all the way out. And that's the way it's been done for the last
I'm
7 or 8 years.
just going through my head on these questions about, because a lot of people get on these forums and there's a lot of misinformation and people start yelling and screaming and stuff like that. But one of the misinformation is, or needs to be clarified, if Mississippi snapper season is shut down and I have a Louisiana license, can I run to Louisiana waters and come back to Mississippi with snapper?
So you've got to land those fish in the state in which you're fishing, the state that's open. So
Makes
when we're
sense.
closed, you can't possess nor harvest in Mississippi waters. And that's simply for the fact of what we just explained. The quotas are divvied out by state. So we're allowed a certain amount. And that number this year was 64, right? So every fish that's landed in our waters counts towards our landings. Every fish that's landed in Louisiana counts toward theirs.
So just to clarify, we're shut down right now. You cannot go to Louisiana and catch a snapper, even with a Louisiana license, and bring it back
Not
to
here.
the state of Mississippi
You
and
have
land
to
it.
land that.
Because how would you
Louisiana.
prove that, right?
Correct.
How would you prove it?
Well, trout, you could. You would
still
go
can.
there. You still can. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. You can go there with a Louisiana license as long as you didn't stop and throw a line out Mississippi waters. You can come to Mississippi and say,
but
here's
that's
my.
full blown honor system there. There's no way.
Well, I mean, you still got to have a Louisiana license. You got to you got to follow Louisiana's
All I'm saying is
rules.
to prove it,
Correct,
unless they
correct.
looked at your GPS. I don't even
They
think that,
can track that. They could look at
I've
the
had
tracks.
them do that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that kind of, it's a good point to cover, right? 'Cause
Yeah.
I think I've probably had 60 calls in the last little while. About
Hey,
it.
man.
I mean, and it's common sense too, right? If they allow it for spotted sea trout, why can't I do it for red snapper? Well, the reason is specifically because of the regulatory nature that exists for that fishery.
Mhm.
Amendment 50, state management, all the stuff we went through to try to gain more access away from that 11 and 3 day season, all the improvements we've been able to make and everything else have been reliant on that regulatory structure. And that's why the answer is you've got to land it in the state that you're fishing.
Yeah.
All right.
Let's go through some of these comments real quick.
Yeah, I got one more after that. Go ahead.
Okay. You want to do it now?
Well, federal reef permits. I know it's touchy. I know there's a big portion of the snapper that's controlled by federal reef permits. They're still open right now.
Mhm.
They can fish
Charter boat
state
captains
waters.
Charter boat captain.
that have that. That's what you're referring
Correct.
to.
Yeah.
Because
They can fish state waters. Where does that quota go? What number does that go to?
So that's it's basically an allocated percentage of the recreational quota. It goes to the private rec side and the for hire side. That sector was split. And so all their landings, which are tabulated in a completely different way,
Mhm.
right? It's through the for hire survey associated with MRIP. So it's call outs to the captains to be able to get, did you go out fishing this week? All that kind of stuff. That gets you the effort. And then the catch level information is produced dockside by us when we go to interview them.
Do they still have to do the tails and scales,
yes.
landing permit, and all that, even though
Mhm.
they are federally permitted?
Yep.
All right.
okay.
Yeah, that requirement has always existed in regulation throughout that time period.
All right. I want to go through the comments, but I want to get back. Help me remember tails and scales and the accuracy, how that affects accuracy. If you can help, because I'm going to forget that. So going back, I think we left off here. Does weather have an effect on rec assessment?
Correct.
A month of constant windy, rough weekends.
All right, I'll say it. On the MRIP side, absolutely not.
Yes.
The only time it has an impact is if it has some deleterious effect on the overall effort estimate, which it typically doesn't, or presents itself in some manner of lower catch per angler, which typically it doesn't, right? Because we're getting a representative sample over a given 2-month span. And it's likely that not every single one of those surveys that occurs at that sites are going to be on the days where the weather is the worst. I would say that.
So the MRAP is the Fed side,
yes.
and that has
Survey.
no effect on weather. But when they give it to you,
Well,
you only go off of numbers that are collected.
that's
Yep.
let me that survey though that you're referring to, the MRIP federal side survey, is what kind of survey again? I know we've asked you this 1,000 times. I'm sorry.
So the FES survey is a mail out survey.
Okay, so you're saying that mail out may not correlate to the bad weekend.
Right.
So it just sounds like it's such a terrible way to do the assessment. No.
So it's kind of the entire crux of what I've worked on since I've been here, right?
Right.
For the last 7 or 8
It sounds like
years.
the way we used to monitor game shows and television in the 80s and 90s, because that was the only way to do it. And that's why I'm saying to remind me about the question with tails and scales, because I want to kind of bring this all back full circle. Like, that just sounds antiquated of a way to do it.
So, I mean, essentially what you run into is that you've got a system that is not robust, right? So robust in the sense that it is unable to detect small scale, or
Mhm.
even in this case, a lot of times large scale change in the fishery.
Two
Right.
weeks worth of bad
Right.
weather.
You would hope that it would be, it would track with the fishery to a degree, but typically it doesn't.
Specificity is
It's
not
not getting to that level of detail. But Tails and Scales does. I mean, that's daily reporting, the weather days impacted, all that kind of stuff. And we saw it, right? We saw a smaller opening weekend than we typically observe because of the wind.
It was
followed
bad.
by
Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
essentially 2 weeks of terrible wind and weather.
Mhm.
But then the third weekend, which for the first time was our highest harvest weekend, highest harvest week, actually, because it went from Saturday to Sunday, and then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday were nice, and we had a slate full of trips every day. And so that basically plays into it. And after that, it was up and down, but typically we averaged around 6,000 to 8,000 pounds a week. And that led us to 60.
And what are the numbers of people? Do you have the numbers of people fishing that week that will give you that 6,000? Like how many people actually slated in that many fish?
Yeah, we got the number of trips that were out, the average number of anglers,
Based on the app.
harvest.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have that. So estimates are produced on the MRIP side
Without all that.
every 2 months.
Yeah. So okay. So why are we still using that then? Why is that even a part of this?
Because
Government.
while
Because government.
Well, number one, I can tell you, you're going to have a hard time getting the average fisherman, the recreational guy, to give you it's like so the phone surveys, for example, number one, they were calling a landline.
Mhm.
Let's just call a spade.
Well,
a spade.
yeah, he talked about that last
Yeah.
time.
Correct. Yeah, that's what I'm bringing that back up.
Yeah.
I know two people that have a landline.
But then also number two is if you don't answer because it's a phone number, you don't. How many times if you don't have a business,
They tried to get a 228 number. I guess y'all ended up getting
right.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, they got
They got
228
the
number,
228
yeah.
number.
Yeah.
I'm
But
still
what-
not answering.
But exactly, you're going to leave me a voicemail. So
Yeah.
and then the mail out survey, you open it up and you look at it and you go, I'm not doing that. And you throw it away. So that really inhibits their data collection. They can't get the numbers they actually need. And number two, I know with the state of Florida, for example, at one point in time, if somebody bought a saltwater fishing license, so whether it was a 3-day non-resident or a residential yearly saltwater fishing, they said you caught your limit of red snappers every single day. And that was at 4, and then it went to 2. And they did it every single day at 8-pound average.
This is why we got the new recreational
was-
offshore landing permit
Correct.
card.
And now
right?
we go to that.
But it just
But
sounds
you
like
have to have the participation. The guys
Man,
have to be
yeah.
honest with it. And it's
So-
not going to
so-
happen.
So y'all
the
don't
other
go off
option-
of number of fishing licenses bought in the state of Mississippi. Y'all go off of a number of people who reported a catch.
yes.
and now with this
and
with this
MS
permit,
Brill,
correct.
it does account for the number of licenses and everything else like that, right? Because it's a phone survey. It's not mandatory reporting. It is a sample of the population that produces some representative estimate of what the effort was in a given week. But I'll say this, right? That's been a point of contention for a while.
Mhm.
Why do we continue to use it if there are problems? And the answer
and a better
is,
system that's already out there and rolling.
Yeah. And the answer is that number one, that survey has existed throughout time.
Because we do it that way. That's why.
1981.
Because that's how we do it.
But hold on.
Right.
I'm not leaning into that drone, right?
I am.
I'm not one of those people that are just like, oh, we just have to keep on doing it because of this. But I'm
No.
telling you the
I know
reasons
you're
that are
not
justified.
because this is the federal side, right? This
Right.
ain't your side.
Right. So it's a consistent survey that's been operated since 1981. That is
Well, that's 43 years old. Let's go on ahead and not update
No,
anything.
you know what? All I'm thinking about is like Toys R Us and like Sears, like
Yeah.
the internet.
And the internet.
What? Amazon. We
That's
don't
older
need
than
that.
Google, y'all.
We don't
That's
need
older
that.
than
We
Google.
send out a magazine. You don't understand. It's a magazine.
Sears Roebuck, baby.
You open it up. You touch it. It's a magazine.
It's a magazine. You can buy a house from it.
Yeah. 2 years
So-
later.
All right, let
Out of
the
business.
man talk.
I'm
Let the man
sorry.
talk.
it's been operated with relative consistency during that time, undergone numerous changes and calibrations, but it does cover every single state year round, multiple species.
Mhm. So the other thing I will say is that the recreational side has to be more open-minded, and the state needs to get involved too. And a lot of guys go, man, I don't want those guys looking at everything I catch. Well, don't be lying about it. But when you pull in there, if you went snapper fishing that day and you want an accurate assessment of what we're actually catching, and you come to the dock with a red snapper, whether you have a private dock, you still need to come report it at a local marina with a weigh scale. You get your tag and you turn around and leave. Now you're going to get accurate numbers.
Yeah.
And the reason why I say that is because that's what the commercial sector does. So if you want a true and accurate
Well,
assessment.
that's why they put the tails and scales in, so you can. How many fish did you catch? 6.
Yeah, but what's the average pound? They go by pounds. So you're going by poundage. They ain't going by how many heads of fish you've caught. They're going by pounds.
That's
Yeah,
right.
But you're not getting
by pounds.
Well, the quota is by pounds, but like when they checked it, we got checked the other day. The one time we went out, we got checked.
Yeah, you're gonna get checked.
From the police, from the law enforcement side, and then also your how do I say
The
that?
research
Research
side.
side. Yeah. But I don't think they weighed the fish.
They did. He measured it. He weighed it, and he cut the.
Okay.
Cut the ear bone.
The ear bone.
Ear
out.
bone
They're gonna
out.
age
He
on
did
it.
weigh it though.
Yeah, he weighed it.
Yeah, they'll wait. But
Forgot.
But my point being is even if I go fishing every day, whether I'm a charter boat or I'm a weekend warrior and I'm taking my dad fishing for the weekend, right? And I got the girls on the boat. We go catch a limited red snappers. If you want an accurate assessment of how many pounds are coming out of the Gulf of Mexico, you have to be able to weigh those fish in. And nobody wants to do that.
No.
Nobody wants to do that. Nobody wants to stop and say, hey, man, here's a basket.
Yeah.
Weigh my fish. It takes 5 minutes for them to do that.
But who's going to do it around here?
Well, you have to set up a program to do that.
They did it
obviously.
to us. What are you talking about?
No.
Well, that's the that's
the DMR. But
there.
what I'm getting at is like at a boat ramp, at a boat launch where you launch your boat.
Yeah.
There's a station right there that they pull in and they go, hey, here's my snappers. Now, how many guys are willing to do that? Number one, it backs the
But
boat
who's
ramp.
manning the station in this?
The state is.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
We got marine
That's what
biologists.
happened to us.
We got marine biologists coming out of school.
Was at
that
Ocean Springs Harbor.
they have no job or they have a minimal job, entry pay. That's a perfect entry pay for a kid that's just graduated college.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. It just sounds to me like, and we'll get back to the comments, guys, in just a second, because we've got a lot coming in. I want to get to all of them. It just sounds to me like we have this old system that's not accurate, not up to date. And then we have the Tails and Scales app on the state side that is up to date, that had a little pushback in the beginning, but I don't really feel like a lot of people now complain too much about it. And it's way more accurate. So what can we do to get away from the other thing and get to where Tails and Scales is the end all be all?
All right, so continuing down the storyline.
right. Like, before y'all cut
Nobody
me off.
say anything.
Before you guys cut me off. Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so the operated with relative consistency, numerous changes. 2013
You
had a
picked it
large
right back
scale
up.
change, and essentially you had a lot of question marks begin to come through in state programs and everything else. Now, the one thing you haven't been able to get past is that each state is operating a different program as a whole. They all function differently at a base level, and they all produce different results. Essentially, you have mixed currencies that really can't be combined, because we do ours through mandatory reporting. Florida does theirs through a reef fish permit. Alabama does theirs through snapper check. That's not hell in, hell out like ours. You report when you get to the dock. Texas does their own thing. Louisiana's got LA Krill. And there's MRIP.
So you have
Across
all
the board.
this.
So
God,
none of
all
that's
of these
going.
things.
Yeah, none of that's going to
God,
work
dog.
together.
And
You talk
each
about
one-
alphabet soup.
And
Yeah.
each one covers a different portion of the fishery, right? Ours covers the red snapper season and the red snapper season only. We don't do out of season discards, nor do we require reporting for other species. Alabama started requiring reporting for greater amberjack and great triggerfish. I'm not going to go through all the details of the rest, but you can see
See where I'm going here.
a multitude of programs, multitude of rules, regional inconsistency across the board makes it really hard to marry all this stuff up together. The only way you can do it is through calibration with a federal
Which-
survey,
that's not
which
good.
we just talked about.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
not good.
So our solution, right? And the feds are actively working on their side too. They recognize that there was an issue after all, essentially everything came up between us, Louisiana going to LA Krill, Florida with the gag situation this past year. All this stuff culminated into the point where they're reevaluating the MRIP survey once again. We're basically getting out of it, moving into MS Krill. And so is Alabama with AL Krill. And we're all going to match up and be regionally consistent. And Florida's program, in my opinion, is close enough to those three to be able to meld together into an assessment to be able to produce new management advice, new allocations, new ACLs, all that stuff across the board. So
Which it should be.
along with that, I'll say there's a little bit of hope, right? There's currently a bill that's sitting in House committee that is essentially the Reform Marine Recreational Information Program and associated products from the National Marine Fisheries Service. It was presented by a representative from Louisiana, and essentially is a pathway to do exactly what we've been talking about, and us switching to MS Krill and everything else. Essentially, if the state wants to go its own way with another survey in another direction that's more robust, that provides additional accountabilities or whatever else you want to call it, they are free and willing to do so and be able to continue to get the funding associated with MRIP in order to do so. I, for one, am in support of the bill. I think it's a great path forward for what we've been working on, and it's really a culmination of the product that's been ongoing for the last 7 to 8 years.
In that scenario, though, if the federal side still trumps what the state's doing, how does it matter? Or did I misunderstand what you said?
No, so with their reevaluation, right, you would hope that essentially what's going to happen is that you're going to see a lot of reduction in recreational catch, not on the water, right? I'm saying their estimates are going to go down.
Yeah.
Or
And
let's
right
call it.
now-
Let's call it be more accurate.
Right.
Right. Let's say that.
They'll be relative to the fishery. They
Yes.
won't be so high in magnitude that they're unfathomable.
Right.
And with that, you then are able to calibrate between the two surveys, which I understand calibration has a very negative moniker to us because of what happened.
Well, it just introduces error.
Right. But in this case, if you can establish some reasonable level of magnitude and allow our survey to be able to basically be the one that guides the magnitude and then go back in time to fix the estimates all the way back to 81 through multi-year averaging, everything else like that, to essentially smooth out the time series to try to get rid of all these fluctuations and everything else, you'll have what I think is a fairly representative amount of catch that is allocated proportionally across the states and is relative to the fishery. With that, you can manage a lot more accurately and with a lot better confidence than we do now. Because what essentially we're operating with now is a system that lacks any level of stakeholder confidence, buy-in, and basically everything that's coming out people disagree with or don't trust.
All right, let's go through some of these. We got some good questions, some good statements.
Well, I knew this was going to be a good one.
No, and it's all professional. Everybody's being ugly.
yeah.
So I want to thank everybody for being patient and throwing your comments in here as well. So we'll go right here.
That's how we get a drink, man. I mean, it's water. Yeah.
So James McCandless, friend of the show, been on here before. He also says, and Trevor, give us like your take on this. He said, I think there should just be a set season, Memorial Day to Labor Day, come what may.
I absolutely agree with that.
There you go.
So I will say, right,
what are the pros and
mid-season-
cons?
So the midseason closure is likely going to be something that stays in the hottest part of the year, highest level of discard mortality, all that kind of stuff. A dream season for me, if I had the magic wand and could make the decisions, right, it would be Friday of Memorial Day through the week after July 4th, midseason closure, opens up September 1st and rolls on all the way through until it's done and culminating into basically a 75-day season.
October,
with-
November.
Well, you got to understand that I know where he's going with that.
Yeah,
Like, he's
yeah,
talking
yeah.
about water temperature, and
Yeah.
I get it.
With all three species being open, and those three species being red snapper, greater amberjack, and gray triggerfish.
Yeah.
It's splitting seasons, splitting timelines, only having seasons open for 30 days have led to nothing but tumultuous management problems
Yeah, logistics, right?
and inconsistency.
Yes.
And the last thing you want to do to stakeholders is provide a large level of inconsistency because they start to lose out in the process. You lose trust and they lose access. I think having those three species together all as one, open for that time period for the three major holidays of Memorial Day, July 4th, and Labor Day will allow the best opportunity and with a fair amount of flexibility, and with it being open, pushes anglers out across the EZ and a little bit further out because they'll want to try to actually harvest triggerfish and amberjack, specifically amberjack, and it puts a little bit less pressure on the local fish haven.
And better data.
Yeah. Great answer.
Because well, I mean, you go to snapper. We used to be able to go and catch 4 snapper a piece plus 2 amberjack. That was a meat haul. I mean, it's worth your $500, $600, $700 fuel tank.
Sure.
Now you're going to go out there and run and do the same thing for 2 snapper.
2 red
a
snappers
piece.
a person.
Captain Brian, and I appreciate you, Captain Brian. If seems new to the comment section, I appreciate you.
Brian
chiming in.
Box.
Yeah,
he's a good guy.
yeah, very much. He said, one incredibly knowledgeable, smart guy. Happy to have him represent the state. So there you go, Trevor. There you go. The one compliment you're going to get.
See,
That's it.
I'm not even.
No more after that.
I'm not even worried about the triggerfish. Like I understand triggerfish. And
Nobody
they're all
really
they're
They're
a plus.
a
But
bycatch.
if I can get my 2 snapper and my amberjack, that makes it a day. Especially
Even-
when I got 4 or 5 people on the boat.
Right. I mean, you got 4 people on the boat when we go out and catch, 8 head of snappers and 4 jacks. That's a banner day.
That's a good day.
That's a great day.
And then
So-
we catch a cobia or something
You're
like
going
that.
to have some
Doesn't matter.
bycatch stuff along there.
Well, it pushes you out to be able to access things like vermilion snapper and maybe some groupers, things like that. It gets you in an area that's not red snapper centric to a degree.
Right.
Get you out beyond that.
And then I think that's the
mark.
problem too, is whenever it opens up, every charter boat in the state of Mississippi has to go in Mississippi waters. So they're going to FH2.
The state guys do.
Yeah, and they're
going
to beat FH2 to the ground.
All right.
Understandably. Go ahead.
Yep. Patrick chimed in and said, why not just report the tail? Why not report tail length of each snapper caught on tails and scales and estimate weight based upon the TL, which I'm assuming he means total length?
Yeah, and so we gather a large amount of measurements dockside in order to be able to calculate the average weight and everything else.
For us that
yeah.
It's certainly something that we've actually discussed and looked at on the development side, and it takes a fair amount of work to be able to get that information, right? Because essentially we're talking about generating it through pictures with some standardized measurement across the board to be able to get what is an accurate representation of the total catch.
Yeah.
Because we can't just go out and get the biggest fish. We can't just measure the smallest fish. We need a accurate representation of the entire catch and everything else like that.
Data.
And I'd say for the most part, we have a pretty good representation of what the average weight is over time. We saw a little bit of a drop this year, below 5.5 pounds. It's not typical, but sometimes, especially for the last 2 years, if we miss the mark on opening weekend with surveys, sometimes we miss the largest fish that are being able to come in.
Right.
And that kind of drops it, because for the rest of the year, for the most part, you're getting a few big fish in there, but most of them are run of the mill. Everything's from 16 to 20 inches.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But y'all been on it.
Yes.
Like I have been to, and I have a pier in the bay, and there's y'all struck at pretty much every boat launch around here.
Yeah, and it was a smooth process for us. We got boarded, like I said, by do you remember, Joey? Was she police?
She was DMR, but she was on
the law enforcement
side of it. Hey, y'all got this, y'all got that.
She boarded the boat, looked through everything.
Looked at the snapper, didn't measure anything. Okay, let me see your trip ticket. Yeah.
No, I had to give her the number.
Yeah. Tails and scales. And then the other guy, as soon as we pull, he was like, go ahead and pull up and we'll get it. And he took every one of them out. He measured them. It's kind of a pain, but it took us probably
it really wasn't that
5
bad.
minutes.
It really wasn't that bad. And if I know, like talking to you guys right now, it's like, if I know that that's part of the solution, I have no problem doing it.
Yeah.
And that's
Zero
the thing.
problem.
Once you figure out that, hey, actually, this is going to help us in the long run.
Right.
It's going to create more access to the fishery for not just us, but the children coming up behind it. That one.
All we did was take the snapper out of the boat. We gave him to him. He cut the ear bone out. He weighed them. He measured them. Blah, blah. Can I see your trip ticket? Blah, blah. Did that, and we were done.
Yeah,
it takes literally. And look, at 2 snappers ahead, and you got 4 people on the boat. That's 8 snappers. It takes them 5 minutes to gather that information and get out the door.
I think there was one more. Let me look real quick. I think there was.
And I'll say this while you're looking for it, right? 95% of the folks that my staff encounter on a daily basis are completely cordial and great. Some folks are in a hurry sometimes. Some folks have things to do. For the most part, everybody's great, but that doesn't mean that everybody.
Right.
No, we understand that. Yeah, trust me.
5% is a big number too. Like when you talk about being,
that's big.
And for those folks that might be listening and everything else, right? Those staff are trying their best to complete their job. You might disagree with it. You might not agree with the policies or everything else like that. They're doing their best to do the job that they're assigned to do. And typically, if they run into a rough customer or anything else, I try to get them to provide my phone number or a phone number of another agency staff for them to call directly and talk to.
Well, and unless that person, the officer or whatever, representative from the Department of Marine Resources being ugly to you first, like just calm the situation down. Like they never do that. It's the point I'm trying to make. It's usually the recreational, the fisherman who gets aggravated. Understand that guy didn't make the law. He's not that. He's just there collecting data. That's all it is, right?
That's all
and if you want to fight it and you don't agree with it, kudos to you. Much respect, but just do it in the appropriate time and in the channels, right?
Show up to the meetings.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I was just going to say. Show up to the meetings, go in there and voice it there, not.
And screaming and yelling at those meetings doesn't do any good. The louder you yell doesn't mean you're going to get hurt.
The more right you are.
It's just one of those things that you just, because I've been to all these meetings, Gulf Council meetings, et cetera, and especially when they were lowering from 4 snappers a person to 2, and then they were separating sectors, and we couldn't participate in the state season with the federal reef permit. There was a big to do, and so I'm gonna be honest with you. There was not a lot of representation from Mississippi. There was a handful of guys, but not a lot.
Yeah.
Obviously, Florida, Texas, Alabama had the bigger majority.
Yeah.
Louisiana, I mean, they might show up, they might not. They don't care. They're rebels down there.
But we all know. We all know. How
Yeah.
that
What you gonna do? Come down here and
Yeah,
get
yeah,
us?
come down there and get us.
Yeah,
No, they ain't coming down the
All
butt.
right, so I got another one real quick, and I think we touched on this the last time you were on the show as well too. So James also said they're trying to get rid of tails and scales with the recreational offshore
Yes. The landing permit.
landing permit MS Krill change that's coming. Is that yes or no?
Yeah. So the likely scenario that we're trying to go down is that we'll have full implementation of MS Krill starting next year, which means dockside and effort. Right now, we're only doing effort. So far this year, I think the offshore trip estimate that was produced through it is probably within a couple hundred trips of what we've produced through tails and scales. So it's relatively consistent with what's being produced. And we know that, reporting every trip and everything else can be a burden. And I understand your discussion on accountability, but we do feel like with MS Krill, what it's producing and what we've seen, it will be a robust enough system to be able to pick up on the shifts in the fishery and monitor it on an annual basis without having to burden anglers with reporting every trip. So that is the intent.
I think tails and scales is easy.
That's what I'm saying, and that's why every time you say that, thank you for telling us.
But that's just more work on y'all's back end because you have to be at the dock to do it. Correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
but they still have to be at the dock even on tails and scales. So let me just
Not really.
Well, they got to.
Yeah,
you have to because we could just be making everything up.
Right, but if you report, hey, I landed, there was no DMR there. I just reported, boom, I got 6 snapper. There
again, that's only based on honesty, and there has to be some type of if nobody's checking it, people are like, I only caught 3 then. Instead of however many.
Yeah, but that doesn't help us.
That doesn't help.
That's the problem. That's what these guys need to understand.
It doesn't help, but I'm just saying human nature is human nature.
No, I agree.
You have to check.
100%.
Right.
That's the other thing that these guys need to understand, because you get a guy from North Mississippi that comes down here and you tell him, hey, man, you only catch 4 red snappers on your boat. He's saying, well, I only got 3. I don't want him thinking, do you understand what I'm saying? It's a mindset.
Right.
So you got to beat that. And if they're catching 4 sows, he's going to go, let's say they're 20-pound legit sows.
Right.
All of a sudden they're really, he's reporting them as 8-pound snappers. He's not helping the cause.
Correct. But I get you. Change the mindset. We've talked about it on the show too, from getting away from meat hauls and Instagram pictures of your deck.
I hate that.
Yeah. Right. And I think it is changing. I feel like it is. I mean, it's anecdotal, but I feel like it is to just keep what you can eat that day. Or if you're going to stock your freezer, do that. But then that's not the goal every time. Let's not brag about, I limited out or whatever, if it's especially on this type of thing.
And it's hard. You got to understand the other
with
side
snapper, with the constraints on it, limited out on snapper, I think is still reasonable.
And it is, but
it's
even on the guide side of it, because
teaching your customers, you mean?
Well, not even just that, but that's part of your sales market, right? Because hanging those fish up and showing those fish every day, you got people walking down the dock.
Oh yeah,
true.
They want to go.
There's also other things that you can do to show online that you had a good time.
1,000,000%,
right? So
1,000,000%. But that's the oldest. That's
understood.
That is your selling card.
Understood. Before we wrap things up, let me paint this picture, and you tell me what I'm wrong when it comes to MS Krill or kind of what Joey and I are talking about with the tails and scales. What if we had the magic wand that you had earlier, and we wave it over the tails and scales app, and it now includes snapper, amberjack, and what was the other species you said?
Triggerfish.
Okay, triggerfish. Right. Every trip is reported. In the app, you report how many you caught. Let's just leave it at that. We're not going to get into maybe weights and lengths or whatever. Let's just do number of fish. Those 3 on a season that is what we talked about earlier, Labor Day, or what did we say, Memorial Day?
4 months, 5 months.
Okay. Yeah. And we run it that way with you guys at the dockside, checking for honesty and policing it the way you should. Is that as good, better system than MS Krill? No. How does that blend into that conversation?
So it's weighing a bunch of different things all together. So the description you had is the perfect in-season monitoring tool for a quota that you're provided to be able to monitor a fishery throughout its time, to be able to say X amount of fish was caught in the 2025 season, 2026 season,
and that's what I'm asking
else.
for. Correct. Yes.
The other side of that is the assessment process, which produces management advice.
Where we get the number from.
All right. That incorporates out of season discards, which we have minimal, but other states have a lot.
Explain to me what that means right there.
So during the course of the red snapper season, we get catch, effort, and reported discards, which are in multiples of 5 and not really
What is
great.
a reported discard?
How many fish you let go?
Correct.
Where you
That's
catch it, you're going snapper fishing, but
Okay.
they're not in season, so you let them go.
We do not operate the Tails and Scales app outside of snapper season because
Correct.
that doesn't make any sense, right? It's an in-season monitoring
Correct.
tool.
I
You don't want a bird
okay,
angler
I
to
see
cross
where
the
I'm
board.
wrong here. I'm only talking about an in-season monitoring tool.
Right.
That's
So
all.
for
And
that-
I didn't frame it that
Yeah,
way. That's
for
all
that,
I'm asking about.
It's the perfect thing,
Okay.
right? It has
Okay.
allowed us to operate with the maximum amount of flexibility to be able to have seasons and be able to monitor what's going on a day-by-day basis in near real time,
Mhm.
provide the extra days when they can be given.
Right.
But the other side of this is the assessment and management side to a degree that produces new and current management advice for the fishery. In order to do that, you have to have a regionally consistent time series that's culminated into assessment that produces a new OFL, ABC, ACL, all the way down the chain so that you can update the amount of fish that can be taken from the stock.
That was my aha moment right there. You just hit it for me. Like I'm a slow learner.
And within
You know
that
what I mean?
conversation,
Like I get it now, like the in-season assessment versus what you're talking about on the outside, which I mean, I understood that before, but you just really drove it home for me, at least on that side of things to get that number more accurate.
and within that conversation, you have all the different arguing points that occur at the Gulf Council level that people line up for miles and miles to yell about.
And they
Which
yell and
is-
scream. It's pointless.
Allocations across sectors,
Mhm.
allocations between states,
Mhm.
allocation within sectors. All those things happen at the Gulf Council level, and the rules are, after that, promulgated by the National Marine Fisheries Service. So you have an assessment that produces management advice, updated OFLs and ABCs. And at the same time, you have a conversation at the council level, which pertains to management that governs over state by state sector allocations across commercial recreational fishery. All of those things happen there, which is why he talked about
And those are open to
Those-
the public.
those are open to the
Right.
public. They're
Right.
across the Gulf states. They're difficult to travel to, but they are allowing online comments, at least have been since COVID at this point.
Well, COVID, yeah.
I don't know if they're going to continue that throughout time, but that is
I
something
think they
they've
give
been
you about
offering.
2 minutes too. When you walk up to the mic, you have about 2 minutes to make
Yeah.
your point, and that's
Mhm.
it.
So the Mississippi Creole, Louisiana Creole, Alabama Creole, if everybody gets on the Creole, that's the same data. I'm guessing it's the same program. Correct?
Regionally consistent. Yeah.
So if we all, the whole Gulf got into a Gulf Creole, that would be enough evidence, throw it to the Fed and say, hey, this is what we got.
Well, by default, that's going to have to be what we move forward with because
Yeah, but-
after
but-
next year,
but
we run
Texas-
MRIP side by side. We're not doing it. Texas is gonna
Texas
keep
is
on
another,
doing that.
they don't even care.
Texas
it's
is doing their
unlimited.
own thing.
Yeah, they don't care.
And look,
Surprise.
Louisiana's not going to be far behind.
well, but they have Louisiana Creole, though. They still have it.
Correct.
Alabama Creole's coming. Florida is
So-
probably going to do their own thing, I
To
guess.
me,
Well, the-
Florida's already doing their own thing.
Florida's such a
Reserves.
hard state to manage because you
Yeah.
have two coastlines, two totally different.
Right.
They got what, 1 day on the East Coast this year, and I think I
Yeah.
don't know what they gave them in the Gulf side, but you're talking from Key West, Florida, all the way to Pensacola.
Well, I looked at the thing today. Alabama's weekend. Louisiana's weekend. Texas, unlimited. Do what you want, bro.
Yeah.
That's how we roll over here.
Let me read this off real quick. I think Patrick he's chimed in a few times. I think this is worth addressing. He said, "I think anglers are more willing to use tails and scales. He said the offshore landing permit doesn't make sense to me, as there is almost zero reason not to get it while getting a saltwater license. If you fish only speckled trout and reds, I suspect most will still get the offshore landing permit just because it's convenient, and that will inflate the number of our anglers that target red snapper."
So my counter to that, right? Because I think all of his points are well made.
Okay.
Valid, yeah.
Definitely a concern.
Mhm.
Surfs, the Florida permit
Mhm.
is free and it's right there along the license system, so you can click on it.
Mhm.
Likely has an oversubscription issue that Patrick
He's
is
referring to.
describing.
Yep.
Ours, we mimicked after LA Krill, where it's a completely separate process
Mhm.
that goes through us. It's not on the MDWFP side. It's not a button you can click to add something onto. You've got to go through our website to be able to get it, specifically if you're going offshore fishing. And right now, the number of total ROLP users is right above 7,000. And our total license universe is around 100,000. So
That's
I
good,
don't think there's
right?
an oversubscription issue.
So there's 100,000 saltwater fishing
Yep.
licenses in the state of Mississippi.
Yeah.
out of state 3 day, all of it, Yeah.
All that could take in, but there's only 7,000 with the landing permit.
Yep.
Yes.
which matches.
And that's just year one. This is year one, so that could go up, right? As more
Yeah.
people become
Well, it
aware
has
of
to
it.
go
Yeah.
up next year, right?
it'll likely be around 10,000 at the peak
Which
of
would
it.
still be a good number.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not, we're basically getting the targeted information from the individuals who are
Mhm.
going out and actually fishing regularly offshore, which is aided in the magnitude of estimates that are being produced. Because from everything we've seen over the entire of all the weeks this year, we are an order of magnitude below what was being produced through MRIP. And we are well in line magnitude wise with what we expect to see out of our fishery.
If I can say one thing from this, it's like if you just pay attention to just like statistic classes, because it matters, right? Because just like what you just said, that's a way of analyzing it. We have 100,000 saltwater licenses in the state of Mississippi, and we're only at 7,000 on the offshore landing permit.
Yeah.
That's a statistic that you can say that, however accurate it is or isn't, at least it's not skewed to where 100,000 and like 80, like we would know that would be off,
Yeah.
right? Or something like that. I
Yeah.
don't know where the threshold would be to say red alert.
Yeah,
but
and even that,
we know.
so we have folks that report offshore effort that don't have the offshore landing permit. It is not many because thanks to everybody out in the public, right? They're doing their job and staying diligent. I think we had like 90 to 95% compliance on the ROLP in the first year.
in the
which
first
is
year. That's
fantastic.
that's crazy. Yeah. Yeah.
That's great.
And kudos to you and your department, because y'all being transparent enough to come on shows like this and actually sit down and talk about it. I think that's helps more than I feel like than anything.
Getting it out there.
Yeah,
For sure.
getting it out there. Yeah, for sure. I think that pretty much wraps up like the comment section. I want to thank everybody for chiming in on that. Well, how do we wrap this up? Is there anything we haven't touched on yet? The only other question that sticks out in my mind that I didn't ask earlier was we had 64,000 allocated and we got 60. What if that number would have came back at like 68? What happens then?
It'd have been essentially minus 4,000 off of next year. So it'd
See,
be
I don't
82
like that.
minus
So
4.
so negatives can roll over, but positives
Yeah.
can't.
Positives don't roll over.
Yeah.
Negatives you get penalized for.
God, it
But
sounds like
but we got to burn it, right? We still got 4,000
So,
out, and there's a
there's
couple of situations that could go on right now.
So there's 4,000 pounds left. And certainly we don't want to see those sit on the table. But
because they don't roll over, you
They
got
do
to
not
use them
roll
or
over.
lose them.
use them or lose them. But we certainly don't want to go over again and get penalized. So we flirted a couple of ideas around, and one of them that's being thrown around right now is essentially what is mimicked in the hunting world, which is kind of a youth weekend, allowing essentially kids 0 to 16 to be able to go out and keep youth limits and everything else like that. Promoted in a way that tries to get them access and get them out on the fishery and still harvest the amount that keeps us within the ACL, because we want to do what we're supposed to do.
Yeah.
Even as much as we might not disagree with it, we're still bound to that rule.
Do what's right. Yeah.
So that's kind of what we're flirting with right now. With 4,000 pounds, it's just difficult to open it up to the full fishery, because on any given day, if everyone loads up, if everyone remembers the Saturday of Labor Day in 2020, we had like 560 trips or something at one point on that day.
Mhm.
And we were only able to open it for one day because essentially it was maxed out.
Destroyed.
Everybody tooled up for it, got ready for it, and went out. And so we certainly don't want to see the pounds left on the table, and we want to be able to provide access, but we want to do so in a way that's meaningful, that follows the regulations that are in place, and provides an overall benefit.
It's safe too.
And we're
like
going
you
to have to, it's a safety thing. And
Yeah.
that idea is,
said. You said
it's
0
currently being discussed.
You said
It's
0 to
not-
16, and I just see like guys bringing like toddlers out or like
Oh, dude.
newborns in their car seats, and they're like, "Oh, I got
Backpacks.
3-month-old. I got to."
Yeah.
We caught all these snapper.
Let's be clear.
Right.
I would hate to incentivize unsafe practices or anything else like that.
But
But,
Understood.
it
But
will
you
follow
also-
suit,
You got
I
to know
promise
the
you.
South Mississippi redneck.
Yeah.
but you also,
That dude's going.
What he's capable of. Yeah.
He's
exactly.
gonna bring a P-row and go chase him.
Yes.
but you also don't want to overstipulate or
Correct.
overburden with the amount of rules and
Yeah,
everything else
absolutely.
to make it tough. So it's a balance, and it's one of the ideas we're discussing. Whether it gets off the ground or not, I'm not sure, but that's essentially a pathway to try to use up that 4,000, I think, in a way that is beneficial to everyone.
I think that would be killer.
I do too. I think if these podcasts shine light on nothing else, but there's a lot of science that goes into this, a lot of data. a lot of things that maybe need to be changed that kind of haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah.
You know, some old school stuff.
And the state guys aren't the bad guys.
That's what I'm
No,
saying.
the state
Yeah.
guys are not the bad guys. It's 100% not the state guys' fault. It's
Right.
it's 100% on the feds. Because when all this started to happen and really started cracking down, it was all feds, all feds, all feds, all feds. And the state just had to, I mean, they were handcuffed. They couldn't do it. To give the resident and the local fishermen access, they had to follow suit.
Yeah.
They're going to get penalized. They're going to
Like
lose
I say,
money.
it sounds like an antiquated system on their side of things that
Oh,
needs
100%.
to be updated, and let's deploy technology in a way that just makes sense and makes the data more accurate, which both helps hopefully the fishermen on the rec side and the stock, the population, right?
Yeah.
More accurate data, better preservation of what we have.
Correct.
And I think that's when you can bring that together, you have less complaints. There'll always be complaints, or always be
there's no
people that
doubt.
have a problem.
No doubt.
But that you reduce that number down, and more people get more time to fish and are, hopefully happier. So we appreciate y'all coming on here and talking with us like you've been doing. I really do feel like it's beneficial.
Tyler, they keep throwing you up, man. They're just like, hey, man, hey, you got any
Trevor to the
questions?
Wolves,
I mean,
baby, to the
did I say
Wolves.
Trevor? I
You
think
did.
that's
You said
Trevor.
Tyler.
I'm
He's a
sorry.
sponsor.
I answered
Yeah.
everything at
It
this
doesn't matter.
point.
You did. He's been called worse. That's what I'm
I'm
picking
sorry.
up. But
Even
no,
today.
Yeah. no. Everybody was good in the comment section. Seriously,
Yeah.
we
Absolutely.
appreciate that. But no, thank you guys for coming on. JJ, thanks for you bringing in your expertise too, man. We could
Yeah,
really
dude.
dive off into your side of things as well. You need to come back. when you
Y'all
got
get
some
down.
time.
Well, that's a dark rabbit hole going.
I
on
know,
that
but
Yeah.
it's fun one though.
He ain't never here. He ain't never here.
one. Man, I
I
just
know.
got back.
Well,
we got a fish cleaning table right next to me, and it's literally blown into the water. It's
It's
all,
just-
all it's left
Oh,
is
yeah,
the
it's
road.
gone, man. It's
Yeah.
sign's gone.
He's got the family tradition on. I like that. The shirt, and then the Team Harvey golf, Team Harvey,
Team
fishing
Harvey. Yes.
Yeah.
So that's the 72 Viking sport fishing boat.
Yeah,
That's-
we got to get you back in and talk about all your trials, travels,
that. Yeah.
fishing.
We can
That's
do
all
that
about
this
it.
week because I leave again. I'm going back to Ocean City. So I'll
Okay.
leave.
Well, we're gonna have to catch you on a downtime or something.
Yeah,
So.
we'll catch me
Trevor,
once
yeah.
the season's over.
Thanks for coming back in, man.
Yeah, brother, we do appreciate it. I like that they keep sending.
I know you keep getting a lot of shots, little gut shots, but we appreciate
No,
you
but
coming
seriously,
back
like they said earlier, though, you are extremely
Yes.
knowledgeable in all things, everything, really. And it's an honor to have you sitting there doing what you're doing for us, because
100%.
like I say, on our side of things, we don't know all that stuff, man. We don't hear it. We just we get dealt with it at the dock or the rules, or you read it online and you're like, why? We don't understand. Y'all are out there fighting to make it better.
and diving into all this old stuff that used to come out to research.
That's right.
So,
That's right. So again, thanks everybody for watching the lives, the replay, the audio, commenting as well. We do a terrible job on the show of promoting our merchandise. But if you'd like to support the show, Brownwater Banter hats, shirts, t-shirts, whatever we got, it's right there on brownwaterbanter.com. Just go to the shop section and you can check it out. If you want to stay connected to everything we're doing, all
Get the app,
conveniently
bro. Get
in
the app.
one place, man. Just go
Modern Recoil.
Brownwater Banter app, free on the App Store and Google Play. All of our shows are in there. Free country, outlaw country radio station that we probably need to update.
Gangster rap.
But it's got some good stuff in it. And you don't have to go hunting all over the internet for us. Like we said, we're going to be doing some giveaways here. We got tickets to the fight with Alan Belcher that we're going to give away. It's going to be through the app, and it's going to be through our email subscription. So you can go to Brownwater Banter and sign up for that as well. And then also the EPIRBs. We haven't figured out yet how we're
We
going to
got
do
two
that.
EPIRBs that are worth.
It's
You know what an EPIRB's worth? It's
Yeah.
a couple $1,000s. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they're not cheap.
No,
Yeah.
they're not. And so they gave us one of those, and we're going to promote that brand as well because
That's the best one on the market.
It is.
ACR.
Yeah.
So I've been around the world. I've done it. I've traveled around the world. And anybody that does what we do for a living or what I do for a living understands the importance of having an EPIRB. And ACR is actually leading the way, not only with the 406, but now the new ones that are coming out. They're really not new. They're a couple years old, but they have a GPS pinger on them. So it's giving the Coast Guard an accurate GPS.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Right
And-
now.
And
Well-
you put it on your boat, and even if the boat goes down, you just
Yep. It
It
flows
deploys.
free. And
Well,
that's the other thing that goes into some stuff that we can talk
Yeah.
about.
I was just blown away because I didn't know I'd never heard the name, didn't know anything about it, even didn't know enough about EPIRBs and PLBs. To be honest with you, I was a little
Personal
embarrassed about it.
locator
Yeah, oh yeah,
vehicles, yeah.
absolutely. And that this company's been around as long as it has to get your stamp of approval on it. Somebody who spends a lot of time
Yeah.
where you can't see land.
Yeah, 406 megahertz is what it operates off of, and the Coast Guard flies around and it sends a ping, and the closer they get, the louder it gets, faster it gets.
Yeah.
It's basically how it works. But the EPIRB and the PLBs, I can't stress enough.
Mhm, mhm.
Get 'em.
That's
I
a
remember you
lifesaver.
talking about it.
Yeah, it's a lifesaver.
Yeah.
I've told y'all about it before, and
we're gonna do a lot more with that company as far as mentioning them on the show.
Those
And
guys
stuff.
are awesome.
They didn't have to do what they did, sending us all that equipment.
No.
It was not cheap. So
no, and
we
it's not.
appreciate that.
When you venture 100 miles offshore or 150 miles offshore,
Yeah.
Better have it.
you
Yeah.
better have it.
And
Don't play around.
we're gonna incorporate that into giving back to the audience. So
That'd be
again, that was a long-winded goodbye. Y'all keep tuning in. We'll